Sir, I'm sorry, but your reservation seems to be experiencing some issues. Marcus Wright stood at the gleaming marble counter of the Grand Meridian Hotel, his reflection distorted in the polished surface. The hotel manager, her nameplate read Patricia Holloway, smiled thinly, not quite meeting his eyes. Behind her, other guests were being checked in efficiently, their credit cards swiped with practiced ease, room keys distributed with warm welcomes, but for Marcus, there was always a problem. Always a system error. Always a miscommunication. I confirmed my reservation yesterday, Marcus said quietly, sliding his phone across the counter with the email confirmation displayed. Room 1542. Executive Suite. 3 nights. Patricia's fingers tapped at her keyboard, her French-tipped nails clicking rhythmically. Yes, well, it seems there was an overbooking situation. You understand how these things happen. Her smile remained fixed, professional, cold. Perhaps you'd prefer one of our, more economical partner properties across town. I'd be happy to make that call for you. Marcus felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the one that appeared whenever someone looked at his dark skin and made assumptions about his bank account, his education, his worth. At 28, he'd built a successful tech consultancy from nothing, dressed impeccably, spoke with the polish of his Ivy League education, and still, to some, he remained invisible until proven valuable, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just any guest. I'll wait, Marcus said, his voice leveled despite the anger simmering beneath. I believe the owner would want to know how you're handling this situation. Patricia's smile faltered only slightly. Sir, I assure you, I am the general manager of this property. If there's a concern about how I'm handling this standard overbooking situation, she never finished her sentence. The grand entrance doors of the hotel swept open, and a striking woman in her early 50s entered, commanding attention without effort. Her tailored suit spoke of power, her confident stride of authority. Several staff members straightened immediately, their faces registering recognition, surprise, and in some cases, barely concealed panic. Marcus smiled for the first time since arriving. Hello, Mom. Life had taught Marcus Wright many lessons, but the most consistent one was this: in certain spaces, his existence was conditional. 3 hours earlier, he'd stepped out of his Tesla at the valet stand, overnight bag in hand. The valet had hesitated just a fraction too long, eyes darting between Marcus and the luxury vehicle, the momentary calculation visible on his face. Does this man belong with this car? Marcus had long ago learned to brush off these micro-moments of doubt, these tiny paper cuts to his dignity. He'd risen too far to let them drag him down. His tech consultancy, Neuraleap Solutions, had just closed a 7-figure deal with a healthcare giant to revolutionize their patient data systems. He was here at the Grand Meridian Hotel for the official contract signing tomorrow, a milestone worth celebrating. The hotel gleamed with old-world luxury, its chandeliers casting warm light over marble floors and richly upholstered furniture. Marcus had chosen it specifically for its reputation, its history, and yes, for what it represented: access to spaces that hadn't always welcomed people who looked like him. Looking for the service entrance? A middle-aged white couple had paused as he studied the ornate ceiling of the lobby, the woman's voice dripping with helpfulness that masked something uglier. No, just admiring the architecture. I'm a guest, Marcus had replied politely, though the words tasted bitter. Why did he have to explain himself? Why did his presence require justification? The couple had moved on without apology, and Marcus had continued to the check-in desk, where Patricia Holloway now stood, tapping at her keyboard with increasing agitation. I don't seem to have any executive suites available, she said, not looking up. Perhaps there was some confusion with your booking. There was no confusion. Marcus had made the reservation himself, had received the confirmation, had even called yesterday to request extra pillows. But Patricia had taken one look at him and decided, consciously or not, that he didn't belong in an executive suite. Check again, Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. The reservation is under Wright. Marcus Wright. Patricia's fingers paused over her keyboard. Right? Something flickered across her face: uncertainty, perhaps. Yes. Right. He didn't elaborate. Let her figure it out, she resumed typing, her confidence visibly wavering. I see a reservation, but it's showing as pending authorization. Perhaps there was an issue with your payment method? Marcus nearly laughed. His credit score was immaculate, his black card had no limit, and the pending authorization excuse was as transparent as glass. He'd heard it before, the polite way of saying, "We're not sure you can afford this." "Run the card again," he said, sliding his credit card across the counter. "I assure you, there's no issue with my payment method." Patricia took the card, her smile now strained. "Of course, sir. Just following protocol." As she swiped his card, Marcus texted his mother, "You might want to stop by the Grand Meridian. Your GM is giving me the 'we don't have your reservation' routine." His mother, Elaine Wright, had purchased the Grand Meridian hotel chain 3 years ago, adding it to her portfolio of luxury properties. She'd built her empire from a single struggling motel inherited from her father, transforming it through sheer force of will and business acumen into Wright Luxury Properties, a hospitality group renowned for excellence. Elaine had wanted to put Marcus's name on the reservation system with a VIP flag, but he'd refused. He never used his family connections to smooth his path. It was important to him to succeed or fail on his own merits, to be treated as anyone else would be treated, but sometimes, like today, those principles came with a cost. The cost of standing at a counter while someone decided your worth based on the color of your skin. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, but it seems we truly are fully booked in our executive suites," Patricia was saying, her tone suggesting the conversation was concluding. "I can offer you a standard room at a discounted rate, or as I mentioned, our partner property across town has availability." Marcus's phone buzzed with his mother's reply, "On my way. 10 minutes. He smiled faintly and pocketed his phone. "I'll wait." Elaine Wright had been in a board meeting when her son's text arrived. At 53, she commanded respect in rooms where she was often the only woman, and frequently the only person of color. Her journey to becoming the CEO of Wright Luxury Properties hadn't been easy, but it had forged her into someone who recognized injustice instantly and addressed it without hesitation. "Gentlemen, we'll need to continue this tomorrow," she'd said, gathering her papers as the financial projections hovered on the screen behind her. "Something requires my immediate attention." No one questioned her. That was the privilege of power, the freedom to act without explanation. As her driver navigated through downtown traffic toward the Grand Meridian, Elaine reflected on the irony. Her son, despite his success, still faced the discrimination she'd fought against her entire career. The difference was that today, she could do more than just endure it. When the car pulled up to the hotel entrance, Elaine took a moment to center herself. Anger wouldn't serve her purpose, precision would. This wasn't just about defending her son, it was about addressing a systemic issue within her own company. She entered the lobby with purposeful strides, her heels clicking against marble, the sound announcing her arrival before her presence did. Several staff members recognized her immediately, some with smiles, others with sudden alarm, and there was Marcus at the front desk, his posture straight but tension visible in his shoulders, a tension she recognized from his childhood whenever he faced yet another barrier placed in his path. Standing across from him was Patricia Holloway, the general manager Elaine had hired 8 months ago based on impressive credentials and recommendations. Patricia hadn't noticed Elaine's arrival, too focused on whatever excuse she was crafting for her son. "Hello, Mom," Marcus said, his voice carrying just enough to make Patricia freeze mid-sentence. Elaine approached the desk, her expression composed but her eyes sharp. "Marcus," she greeted her son with a brief hug before turning to Patricia. "Ms. Holloway, I believe my son is trying to check in." Patricia's face had drained of color. "Mrs. Wright. We weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," Elaine replied, her tone measured. "I understand there's an issue with my son's reservation." Patricia's composure cracked further. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. The system is showing, may I?" Elaine interrupted, gesturing to the computer. Without waiting for permission, she came around the counter and tapped a few keys, navigating the reservation system with the familiarity of someone who had helped design it. "Interesting," she said after a moment. "I see Mr. Wright's reservation right here. Executive Suite 1542, fully confirmed and paid. No pending authorization issues whatsoever." She looked up at Patricia, whose professional mask had completely slipped now. "Perhaps you'd like to explain what kind of system error you were seeing." Patricia stammered, "There must have been a glitch. Sometimes the system doesn't display all available." "Our system doesn't glitch, Ms. Holloway. We invested $3 million last year to ensure that." Elaine's voice remained calm, but gained an edge of steel. "What it does do is create a log of every action taken on a reservation, including when someone manually flags it for review or intentionally changes its status." The lobby had grown quieter, guests and staff alike sensing the tension unfolding at the front desk. Marcus stood silently, his expression unreadable, but Elaine knew her son well enough to recognize the hurt beneath his composed exterior. "Marcus, why don't you go to the lounge? I'll have your key sent over in a few minutes." Elaine smiled at her son, a private signal between them she would handle this. Marcus nodded, understanding. "Thank you." As he walked away, his dignity intact, Elaine turned back to Patricia. "My office, now," she said quietly. "And bring the reservation logs with you." Patricia Holloway had never seen the owner's private office at the Grand Meridian. Located on the top floor with a view of the city skyline, it was elegantly appointed yet functional, much like Elaine Wright herself. "Sit down, Miss Holloway," Elaine said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I'd like to understand exactly what happened downstairs." Patricia smoothed her skirt nervously. "Mrs. Wright, I want to assure you that this was simply a misunderstanding. Had I known Mr. Wright was your son." "That's precisely the problem," Elaine cut in. "The fact that you would treat any guest differently based on who you think they are or aren't connected to." She turned her computer monitor so Patricia could see it. On the screen was Marcus's reservation details, alongside a log of activity. "At 3:42 p.m. today, someone using your authentication credentials changed the status of this reservation from confirmed to pending authorization. The system flagged this as unusual since the payment had already cleared." Patricia's face flushed. "There must be some mistake." "Then at 3:44 p.m., you attempted to release the executive suite back into available inventory." Elaine scrolled through the log. "Interestingly, you didn't do this with any other reservations today." "Just my son's." Patricia fell silent, her excuses exhausted. "Ms. Holloway, I've been in the hospitality industry for 30 years. I've experienced discrimination firsthand. I've been asked if I was lost when entering my own hotels. I've been directed to service entrances. I've been handed vacuum cleaners by guests who assumed I was housekeeping." Elaine's voice remained steady, but carried the weight of decades of similar experiences. "So when my son, a successful businessman who can more than afford an executive suite, texts me that he's being told his reservation doesn't exist, I recognize the pattern immediately." Patricia stared at her hands. "Mrs. Wright, I assure you this wasn't about I didn't what? Didn't expect that young black man in casual clothes to be able to afford an executive suite. Didn't think he belonged in a luxury hotel unless he was serving drinks or carrying luggage." Elaine leaned forward. "Or didn't expect him to be the son of the owner." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice barely audible. "I made a judgment. I saw him and made assumptions I shouldn't have made." "At least you're honest about that much," Elaine said. "Do you understand that what you did wasn't just morally wrong, but also bad business? Do you know what my son does for a living, Miss Holloway?" Patricia shook her head. "He's the founder and CEO of Neuroleap Solutions. His company just signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Meridian Health Systems, no relation to our hotel, though the irony isn't lost on me. He was staying here for the contract signing tomorrow. Elaine pulled up an article on her tablet and turned it to show Patricia. This Marcus Wright. The one featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 Foot last year. Patricia's face crumpled as she realized the magnitude of her error not just ethically, but professionally. But even if he wasn't any of those things, Elaine continued, even if he was just a young man who saved up for months to treat himself to a nice hotel stay, he would deserve the same respect and service as any other guest who walks through our doors. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer. This is our company's non-discrimination policy. The one you signed when you took this position. The one that explicitly states that all guests will be treated with equal dignity and respect regardless of race, gender, religion, or appearance. Mrs. Wright, please, Patricia's voice shook. I made a terrible mistake. It won't happen again. You're right about that, Elaine said firmly. Because as of this moment, you're terminated from your position at this hotel and all properties within the Wright Luxury Group. Patricia's mouth fell open. You're firing me? Just like that? Just like that, Elaine confirmed. The same way you decided to deny my son a room he had reserved and paid for. The difference is that your decision was based on prejudice, while mine is based on documented violation of company policy. Elaine stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. You'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings. Human Resources will contact you regarding final paperwork. As a stunned Patricia was led out by security, Elaine pressed the intercom. Send Thomas up, please. Minutes later, Thomas Chen, the assistant manager, entered the office looking apprehensive. Thomas, effective immediately, you'll be acting as general manager while we search for a permanent replacement, Elaine informed him. Your first task is to review all instances where guests have been turned away in the past 6 months. I want to know if what happened today is an isolated incident or a pattern. Thomas nodded seriously. I understand, Mrs. Wright. And for what it's worth, I was uncomfortable with what happened downstairs. I should have spoken up. Yes, you should have, Elaine agreed. Being a bystander to discrimination makes you complicit in it. But you have a chance to do better now. As Thomas left, Elaine sat back in her chair, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. This was bigger than one incident with her son. It was about the culture she wanted to create across all her properties, one where everyone truly was welcomed. It was time to make some changes. Marcus sat at a corner table in the hotel's elegant lounge, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as dusk settled over the skyline. A server had brought him a whiskey. With the manager's compliments, Thomas had wasted no time in attempting to make amends. His phone buzzed with messages from the Meridian Health team, confirming tomorrow's contract signing. Success should have felt sweeter than this, but the earlier incident had left a familiar bitter aftertaste. Is this seat taken? His mother's voice broke through his thoughts. Marcus smiled up at her. It's all yours. Elaine sat down, signaling for a drink of her own. Room key, she said, sliding a card across the table. Executive Suite 1542, as reserved. Thank you, Marcus said, pocketing the key. Then, more quietly, you didn't have to come down here yourself. Yes, I did. Elaine's tone left no room for argument. No son of mine is going to be treated that way in my hotel or anywhere else, if I can help it. Marcus sighed. What happened to Patricia? She's been terminated. Mom, this isn't special treatment, Marcus, Elaine cut him off gently. This is the same action I would take for any manager who violated our non-discrimination policies. The fact that it happened to my son just means I witnessed it firsthand. Marcus nodded slowly, knowing she was right. I just hate that it still happens. That no matter what I achieve, to some people, I'm still just, I know, Elaine said softly, reaching across to squeeze his hand. But that's their failure, not yours. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Elaine spoke again. I've been thinking about implementing a new training program across all properties. Not just the standard diversity training everyone clicks through, but something more substantive. Real scenarios, consequences, accountability. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You want to use what happened today? Not specifically, no. But situations like it. Elaine took a sip of her newly arrived martini. This incident made me realize we need to do more. Much more. Marcus considered this, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His mother had always been a problem solver, turning obstacles into opportunities. It was where he'd learned his own resilience. What if, he said slowly, Neuroleap helped develop that training program? Elaine looked intrigued. Go on. We've been working on virtual reality simulations for medical training. The same technology could create immersive scenarios that help staff experience discrimination from the recipient's perspective. Marcus leaned forward, his earlier dejection transforming into purpose. Emotional intelligence training through experiential learning. A smile spread across Elaine's face. That's brilliant, Marcus. I'll have my team draft a proposal, he said, already mentally assembling the right people for the project. We could pilot it here, then roll it out across the industry if it works. Turning a negative experience into something that might prevent thousands of others from happening, Elaine mused. That's exactly the kind of leadership I raised you to show. The weight that had settled on Marcus's chest earlier began to lift. He couldn't change what had happened today, but perhaps he could help change what happened tomorrow. To new beginnings, Elaine said, raising her glass. Marcus clinked his against hers. And to making space for everyone. The Grand Meridian's largest conference room was filled to capacity. Hotel managers from every property in the Wright luxury group sat attentively as Marcus adjusted the virtual reality headset on a volunteer from the audience. What you're about to experience is called Walk a Mile, Marcus explained to the gathered crowd. It's a 10-minute immersive simulation that will allow you to experience various scenarios from perspectives you might not normally inhabit. On the large screen behind him, the audience could see what the volunteer was seeing: a first-person view of entering a luxury hotel, the camera positioned to suggest the perspective of a young black man. As the simulation progressed, the audience watched in silence as subtle and not so subtle forms of discrimination unfolded, security guards following too closely, staff addressing companions instead of the protagonist, assumptions made about ability to pay. When the volunteer removed the headset, his face was solemn. That was uncomfortable. And eye-opening. Marcus nodded. That's exactly the point. Discomfort can be a powerful teacher. From the back of the room, Elaine watched with pride as her son guided the group through a discussion. The pilot program had exceeded all expectations. Staff who completed the VR training showed measurable improvements in customer service metrics across all demographic groups. Guest satisfaction scores had risen throughout the hotel chain. Thomas Chen, now the permanent general manager of the Grand Meridian after proving himself in the interim role, approached Elaine. The program is being requested by 3 other hotel groups, he informed her quietly. Marcus has created something revolutionary here. He always does, Elaine replied with a smile. After the presentation concluded, Marcus found his mother in the hallway outside. So, what did you think? He asked. I think you've taken something painful and transformed it into something powerful, Elaine said. Your father would have been so proud. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar pang at the mention of his late father, who hadn't lived to see either his or his mother's success. He always said the measure of a person isn't how they handle praise, but how they respond to injustice. And you responded by creating change, Elaine said. The contract with Meridian Health was just the beginning, wasn't it? This is your real legacy. Marcus looked through the doors at the diverse group of hospitality professionals still engaged in animated discussion about the training they'd just experienced. Maybe. Or maybe it's just good business. Companies that understand and respect the full spectrum of humanity simply perform better. Elaine laughed. Now you sound like me. Worse things have happened, Marcus grinned. A young staff member approached them hesitantly. Excuse me, Mr. Wright. There's a guest in the lobby asking if you're the Marcus Wright from Neuroleap. She says she read about your program in Business Insider and wanted to discuss implementing it in her company's healthcare facilities. Marcus exchanged a glance with his mother. Tell her I'll be right there. As the staff member left, Elaine straightened her son's already perfect tie. Go change the world, one mind at a time. I learned from the best, Marcus replied, giving her a quick hug before heading toward the lobby. Elaine watched him go, reflecting on how a moment of discrimination had sparked a movement toward greater understanding. It wasn't justice, exactly nothing could fully erase the hurt of being judged by your appearance rather than your character. But it was progress. And progress, however incremental, was always worth fighting for. In the grand lobby of the hotel that bore her family name, Elaine Wright stood a little straighter, ready to continue that fight not just for her son, but for everyone who deserved to walk through doors without having to prove they belonged there.